We live in a world where true heroes are forgotten, while empty fame is celebrated every day. Sounds unfair, doesn't it? How many lives must be saved before someone is truly remembered? The story you're about to hear breaks all the modern rules of what it means to be successful. It proves that real greatness isn't loud. It quietly changes everything. You'll discover how one man, scarred by war and abandoned by society, reignited hope for an entire generation, all with one less leg, and a courage the modern world had long buried. Don't expect shiny trophies or hollow standing ovations here. What you'll see is the raw victory of changing lives when no one is watching. And the best part? This story will show you that you, too, can leave a legacy, even if no one is clapping right now. Get ready to dive into a real journey of pain, resilience, and transformation. A story that will touch places inside you that you may have forgotten, and spark something that's been quietly waiting for the right moment to rise again. After all, here's the real question. When the world forgets your name, will your actions still echo? John McAllister proved they can. And now, it's your turn to find out how. John McAllister had always known that wars don't end when the gunfire stops. It felt like a part of him had been left behind on the battlefield, along with the leg he lost and the friends who never made it home. He carried wounds no x-ray could reveal, wounds that weighed heavier than any armor he'd ever worn. Even after hanging up his uniform, John couldn't walk down a quiet street without feeling the invisible weight of the past pressing on his chest. Sometimes, late at night, he heard the echoes of voices, the voices of brothers in arms he couldn't save. Survival, he realized, was only the beginning of a much longer war. In the small town he called home, John blended in like any other aging man, just a little more reserved. Kids stared at his shining prosthetic leg with a mix of curiosity and fear, and adults often kept conversations polite and short, too wary of reopening wounds they didn't understand. Yet there was something in his eyes, a quiet steadiness that spoke volumes without a single word. It was the kind of strength only those who have stared death in the face could carry. Still, John smiled at strangers, held doors open, and fed the birds in the park every afternoon, waging silent battles for kindness in a world too busy to notice. Life moved on quietly until one afternoon when sirens shattered calm. Thick black smoke poured from an apartment building across the street. In the panic, someone shouted that a little girl was trapped inside. Most people froze, calculating the danger. But John, with his heavy steps and worn-out body, didn't hesitate. Like a soldier answering a distant call to battle, he pushed through the crowd and into the burning building. The old instincts kicked in, deep in his bones, reminding him that a true warrior doesn't need a battlefield to fight. And in that moment, John McAllister showed the world that real heroes never retire. The flames roared with ferocity that shook the walls as John climbed the stairs, every step a brutal negotiation between instinct and pain. The heat licked at his skin, smoke clawed at his lungs, and for a moment, it felt like the war had found him again. But he pressed forward. Somewhere beyond the smoke, a life depended on him. In a world that had forgotten what real courage looked like, John moved like a man who had nothing left to prove, only something left to give. Sometimes life tests us without warning. And at that moment, John's answer was simple. Move forward no matter what. On the third floor, he found her, a little girl, no older than 10, crouched in a corner, her tiny frame shaking with fear. The walls cracked and groaned as the fire ate through the building's skeleton. Without a second thought, John threw his jacket over her, crouched low, his joints screaming in protest, and scooped her into his arms. The searing pain from his prosthetic grinding against his burned skin was a distant echo. All that mattered was getting her out. When the moment comes to choose between comfort and sacrifice, a true warrior doesn't think twice. He simply acts. As John staggered back down the stairs, the building crumbled around him. People outside shouted, some with fear, some with hope, but John didn't hear them. His focus was locked on the girl clinging to him, her small fingers gripping the metal he wore on his chest like it was a lifeline. Bursting through the door into the open air, he collapsed to his knees. The crowd erupted into cheers, but for John, there was only one victory. The heartbeat he felt against his chest. Little did he know, that heartbeat would change both their lives forever, reigniting forgotten truth. that real heroes were scars, not capes. After that day, John McAllister's life changed in ways he never anticipated. As he lay recovering in the hospital, patches of burned skin bandaged and lungs fighting to heal from the smoke, the world outside was buzzing. It wasn't just the neighbors. The whole town seemed to wake up and remember him. Reporters camped outside, soldiers requested visits, and children sent hand-drawn thank you notes filled with bright colors and misspelled words. John, though, never sought the attention. For him, doing what was right was never about medals or headlines. It was about honoring the brothers he left behind and giving meaning to the scars he wore on his body and soul. Hospital days were long and quiet, offering John too much time to think. He often glanced across the hallway to the little girl he'd pulled from the fire, now wrapped in bandages, flashing a fragile but genuine smile whenever their eyes met. That smile carried more weight than any award ever could. Sitting in that sterile, humming hallway, John realized that war hadn't taken everything from him. It had left him with a rare gift, the ability to transform pain into hope. Like the Japanese art kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, John's wounds hadn't broken him. They made him priceless. Weeks later, when John was finally discharged, the town had a surprise waiting for him. A small ceremony had been arranged in his honor, not flashy, but heartfelt. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, handmade signs read, "Thank you, John," and the smell of grilled hot dogs filled the air. He tried to decline, humility stitched into his bones, but one look at the teary-eyed little girl changed his mind. Sometimes, accepting love is the bravest thing a person can do. And as he stood there, wrapped in hugs and gratitude, John understood something profound. He wasn't just a forgotten veteran anymore. He was living proof that real heroes might fade from the news, but they never disappear from the hearts they touch. On the morning of the official ceremony at the military base, John McAllister woke up earlier than usual. He pulled out his old uniform, the one he'd carefully stored away for decades, still carrying the faint smell of dust, memories, and battles fought far from home. With the help of a young sergeant, he adjusted the fabric over his worn frame. The gleam of his prosthetic and the sharpness of his salute stood in sharp contrast to the wrinkles on his face and the silver in his hair. Looking in the mirror, John didn't see an old man. He saw a soldier who had survived the worst life could throw at him. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought long after the war ends, and the uniform still fits when it matters. Most, as he arrived at the base, a line of soldiers snapped to attention, saluting him in perfect unison. The sound echoed through the courtyard, striking something deep inside his chest. The girl he had saved, now walking, still healing but stronger every day, approached him with a small box in her trembling hands. With a voice thick with emotion, she read a letter aloud. "To the hero who gave me a second chance and showed me that true courage has no age." John fought back tears. Moments like this are rare, and in a world quick to forget, this one was a promise that true heroes would not be erased. When the Medal of Honor was pinned to his chest, John didn't feel the weight of the medal. He felt the weight of memories, of friends lost, battles fought, nights spent wondering why he was spared. The room was packed, soldiers in uniform, townsfolk, journalists, families. But for John, the world narrowed to the little girl's smile, the strong handshakes of soldiers, and the unspoken gratitude that filled the air. True honor, he realized, doesn't come from medals or speeches. It lives in the hearts of those who remember the sacrifices made for them. And in that room, surrounded by love and respect, John finally found peace. The story of John McAllister spread faster than wildfire. In just a few days, local newspapers, national TV stations, and online platforms picked up the story. Real heroes were rare these days, and even rarer were the ones who never asked for a spotlight. John, however, felt deeply uncomfortable with the sudden attention. He'd smile awkwardly during interviews, shrug off compliments, and remind everyone that he was just doing what anyone should do. Deep down, he knew that true worth isn't measured by headlines or viral posts. It's measured by the quiet, lasting impact you leave behind. Something he saw clearly in the grateful eyes of the little girl he saved. Despite the media frenzy, John refused to change who he was. He continued living the same simple life he always had, feeding the birds at the park, sharing laughs with old friends at the corner store, and visiting the children's hospital where the girl now went for therapy. He became a familiar, comforting figure, a quiet guardian for kids fighting their own battles. It wasn't uncommon to see him sitting cross-legged on the hospital floor, telling stories not about war and heroics, but about small victories. The first time a child took a step on their own, or the day someone finally got their bandages off. John proved that being a hero isn't about grand gestures. It's about the love and patience you show, one small moment at a time. As months passed, the honors kept coming. Schools named libraries after him. Veterans sent letters filled with raw emotion, and teenagers asked him how they could live a life like his. John always gave the same answer. You don't have to be a soldier to be a hero. Heroes are people who choose to love even when it hurts, to keep trying even when they're tired. And every time he watched a little girl, now stronger, braver, and running across the park with scars worn like medals, John realized that the recognition he never sought would live on far longer than any headline. He had sparked something no one could ever extinguish. Months after the ceremony faded from the headlines, John McAllister felt something stirred deep inside him. It wasn't the restless energy of a soldier longing for battle. It was a quieter, more determined fire, the need to turn his story into something greater. He realized surviving was enough. He needed to pass it forward. John decided to visit schools, hospitals, and community centers, not to relive his past, but to show others how to face theirs. And he didn't show up as a war hero with a chest full of medals. He came as a storyteller who understood what it meant to carry pain and how to use it to light the way for others. Each speech he gave was a battle in itself. John, who spent most of his life avoiding the spotlight, now stood before crowds of wide-eyed kids, skeptical teenagers, and weary adults. He talked about courage not as something reserved for warriors, but as a choice anyone could make every single day. Courage to get out of bed when you're broken. Courage to forgive when it's easier to hate. Courage to love even when you're scared. Sometimes he'd point to examples, like reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning or volunteering at local shelters, giving people real tools to build their strength. And slowly, faces that entered the room heavy with doubt left a little taller, a little braver. One rainy afternoon, after a talk at a local high school, a young woman approached John, her hands trembling. "Because of you," she said, voice cracking, "I'm going to become a doctor for burn victims." John smiled, that rare kind of smile that says more than words ever could. In that moment, he realized that saving the little girl from the fire wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The real victory wasn't pulling her from the flames. It was igniting something in others that would continue long after he was gone. True heroes don't create monuments to themselves. They build bridges for others to cross. As the years rolled by, John McAllister's name became a legend in his hometown, not because he chased fame, but because real greatness simply couldn't be hidden. His story was passed down like a cherished secret, told at school assemblies, around dinner tables, and at backyard barbecues. In a world obsessed with celebrity, John was a reminder that true strength isn't loud or flashy. It's steady, it's humble, and it leaves deep roots. While society often praised the ones who shouted the loudest, John showed that the real giants were the ones who stood tall in silence, doing the right thing even when no one was watching. At a special Veterans Day ceremony, John, older now, with slower steps and a face weathered by time, was asked to give a speech. He walked to the podium, steadying himself on his cane, and looked out over a sea of faces. He didn't talk about battles or medals. Instead, he spoke about the quiet victories, getting up one more time when you fall, staying kind when the world turns cold, and holding on to your values when it will be so much easier to let go. His voice, rough but strong, carried to the auditorium, dropping seeds of courage into every heart. The biggest lessons he knew weren't taught by yelling. They were planted gently, with care and truth. After the ceremony, as John made his way through the crowd, he saw her, the little girl he had saved, now a grown woman. She stood tall, confident, wearing the white coat of a nurse specializing in burn victims. Her eyes shone with gratitude and pride as she hugged him tightly. "You changed my life, Mr. McAllister," she whispered, "and now I'm changing others." John didn't say much, He didn't need to. Sometimes the greatest satisfaction comes not from awards or applause, but from seeing the ripple of your actions spread outward, touching lives you'll never even meet. True heroes, he realized, live on to the good they inspire in others. With his legacy firmly rooted, John McAllister found a new mission, helping other veterans who felt forgotten and lost. Many of them carried invisible wounds, battles fought long after their uniforms were hung up. John knew the loneliness, the heavy silence, and the slow-burning pain that came with feeling like the world had moved on without you. So he stepped up, not as a savior, but as a fellow soldier who understood. Week after week, he gathered veterans in a small, worn-down community center. No fancy speeches, no official ceremonies, just a circle of chairs, strong coffee, and the open invitation to finally lay their burdens down. Those meetings quickly became a lifeline. John encouraged everyone to share their stories, no matter how painful, no matter how raw. Every sunrise you face is a medal of honor, he would say, his voice carrying a quiet certainty that only someone who had walked through fire could offer. Slowly, the walls built by pride and shame began to crack. Laughter returned, jokes flew around the room, and dreams, once buried under scars, started to stir. Sometimes John would hand out copies of the things they carried by Tim O'Brien or suggest volunteering at youth centers to help others find their footing again. Healing, he knew, didn't come from forgetting. It came from facing your scars and choosing to move forward anyway. One evening, after a long session filled with laughter and few tears, a young veteran approached John with misty eyes. "I thought my story ended when I came home," he said, voice breaking. "But because of you, I see it's just beginning." John simply smiled, gripping the young man's shoulder firmly. No pep talk was needed. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in what you say, but in simply being there, living proof that broken doesn't mean beaten. And just like that, John continued his mission. Not fighting on foreign soil anymore, but waging a quieter war. A war to reclaim hope, one wounded soul at a time. Time moved on, but John McAllister's spirit remained young, steady and unbreakable. Even as his body slowed down and old wounds ached louder with each passing year, John refused to be seen as fragile. Instead, he became a living example that true strength isn't measured in muscle or speed, but in heart. It wasn't unusual to spot him downtown teaching kids how to tie military knots or showing Boy Scout survival tricks. All the wisdom he had gathered on battlefields and in quiet hospital rooms now found new soil to grow. At some point, surviving isn't just about staying alive. It's about teaching others how to live. For some, John was a distant inspiration, a name in a newspaper or a story told in passing. But for those who truly knew him, he was much more. He was a neighbor who called on tough days, the old soldier who mailed handwritten notes when someone was struggling, the quiet man who sat beside you in a hospital waiting room without saying a word, just so you didn't have to be alone. John didn't change lives with grand speeches or grand gestures. He did it through relentless presence, a force so rare in a world too busy to see what matters most. One chilly November morning, the town woke up to the news that John McAllister had passed away peacefully in his sleep. But there was no somber mourning. There was a celebration, a long procession wound to the streets, filled with flags, laughter, and quiet tears. Children carried handmade signs that read, "Thank you, John." Veterans marched with heads held high, saluting a man who reminded them of their worth. And among them, the young woman he once saved, now a nurse standing proud, wore his medal over her heart. Because heroes like John don't vanish. They live on in the lives they touched, in the dreams they inspired, and in every act of quiet courage they leave behind. Years after John McAllister's passing, his name still echoed through his town, not carved into statues, but etched deep in people's hearts. His story lived on, shared in classrooms, whispered during family dinners, and told with pride at town gatherings. While others chased fleeting fame, John proved that true greatness isn't broadcasted. It's lived quietly and persistently. He showed that real legacies aren't built with applause, but with the invisible threads that tie people together across generations. Some people leave behind monuments. Others, like John, leave behind a living spirit that keeps growing long after they're gone. The little girl he once saved, now a strong, determined woman, founded an organization in his honor, the McAllister Hope Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans and burn survivors rebuild their lives. It became a sanctuary for those carrying both visible and invisible scars. In every hallway of the foundation, a simple frame quote hung proudly: "Real courage is moving forward, even when no one is watching." It wasn't just a slogan. It was the heart of everything John stood for. His story became a bridge between generations, reminding each new face that scars aren't signs of defeat. They are proof of survival and of triumph. And so, on quiet nights when the American flag rustled softly over the town square, it felt like John's spirit was still there, not as a ghost, but as a guiding light. Some victories aren't won in explosions or parades. They're won in every quiet moment someone chooses to keep going when it would be easier to quit. John McAllister wasn't just a war hero. He wasn't just a man who saved a little girl from a burning building. He was, and still is, a living example that the real measure of life is not how loudly you're remembered, but how deeply you're felt.